The last 4 years of my life have been incredibly turbulent. My beloved wife, Victoria, was stricken bedbound with a terrible illness. In that situation, I rose to the occasion and began taking care of her, managing the complexities of an emergency healthcare situation where we didn't have any control over the outcome. That required me to dig as deep as I could possibly dig. I worked closely with my mentor, Dr. Strachan, and I did a lot of focused soul work to try to show up to the best of my ability and be sure that my wife knows that I love her, I'm here for her, and I'm going to stay by her side. We talk about marriage vows glibly, but the truth is that we don't really know how strong they are until they are tested. And the blessing of this situation is that Victoria and I are stronger than ever, although I'm sure she and certainly I would not wish it on her or anyone else. But through that struggle, we've become stronger. As I continued to deal with this situation, we have faced incredible caregiver shortages, volatile insurance issues, healthcare issues, and a more or less constant crisis of healthcare. I have actually, at this point in time, in 2026, not pulled out of my driveway in over a month. And before that, had maybe left the house once or twice in a few months, maybe 3 times, because the caregiver shortage in the home health industry is abhorrent. I've been unable to get help and sustain help for a while now. Now, granted, I did have some precious caregivers that were here for a while, and even then, I was still on duty for a lot of time. Now, when life doesn't go our way, it's easy to get frustrated and depressed. And I've certainly faced those feelings. After all, having just finished my PhD in the last couple of years, I was excited to get started with my career as a psychologist, seeing clients and using the self-soul-spirit model, which Dr. Strachan trained me in and passed down to me. But unfortunately, that was not the will of God. I had to show up for this situation here at home and realize that things aren't going to go my way, and I have a choice to stay by my wife's side, and that's the most important choice that I can make. So in this process, I've matured in a humble sense, because I wouldn't say that I have really arrived anywhere. I think I'm just a work in progress. I still have a very long way to go, but I've made some progress, and in that process, I've learned to stop complaining, and I'd say I've significantly improved in that area. I've learned to focus more on spirituality. I had a secular streak in my 20s where it's not that I didn't acknowledge the existence of a greater power, but I felt skeptical and somewhat agnostic, or even disinterested for a while, because I felt like it was something that was beyond my comprehension, and I was more interested in the sciences and in the study of the personality and the psychological confines of the human being. And that served me, to be sure, because I needed to learn those things in order to develop into somebody who had a generally sophisticated understanding of the human psyche. But I relied on all those tools, those individualized psychology tools, and they only got me so far in this situation until I had to start relying on a power greater than myself. For me, that power appeared to me as Jesus. And if you would have told me 3 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, that I would suddenly convert to Christianity, I would have told you you're crazy. First of all, I would have said, That's a made-up man. That's a man-made religion. The idea that God is one human being that came down is totally unbelievable and just, defies rationality. And I would have just dismissed you. And I would have said to you, any spirituality worth considering is going to be so universal that it can apply to Hindus and Buddhists and Native Americans, on and on and on. And I would have had reasonable arguments that seemed to make sense. But they wouldn't have been arguments that really contended with the Orthodox Christian tradition and the claims of Christianity, which are much deeper than a sort of surface level repudiation can dismiss. It wasn't something that I understood. Why? Well, I'd never tried reading the Bible. I'd never really seriously engaged the thought that maybe Christianity had something to offer. And I won't get into all the experiences I had that led me to Jesus. All I will say to you is that for whatever reason, Jesus started appearing to me and helped me find the courage and the strength to rise above my own individualistic needs, desires, wants, and really show up for Victoria to the best of my ability. And every time I fell short of that, whether it was through complaining or irritability or just having a flat out bad day or whatever it would be, anger, Jesus kept encouraging me, show up for Victoria. Show up for Victoria. Now, at first I couldn't reconcile the idea of Jesus being my God with my previous philosophical understanding of the world and of the universe. After all, the spirituality that I did have, because I don't want to make it seem like I didn't have any spirituality, I certainly did, but like I said, it was sort of bridled by a bit of a secular streak in my 20s. But the spirituality that I did have continued to emerge in sort of a pantheistic way, which is to say that God is in everything. God is in, God is me, God is you, God is Maharaji, God is Ram Dass, God is Buddha, God is whatever, right? That it's about our ability to realize God is only confined by our mental limitations, and through yoga or through practices of spiritual growth, we can remove the obstacles between us and God and become enlightened. Now, I don't mean to be offensive to anyone who holds those beliefs that's watching this video. All I can say is that was my understanding, but through this encounter with Jesus, my understanding was transfigured. But I couldn't reconcile it because I didn't have the conceptual tools to redefine my philosophy without also dismissing the exclusive nature of now what was my relationship with Jesus. So I kind of was in no man's land, and I was just being a phenomenologist, which is something that I also learned in my 20s, which is to say that I became comfortable with meeting experiences in their own right as justified by the fact that I'm experiencing it without having to explain it away or, having to erect a false intellectual concept in order to feel good about it, but also without having to sacrifice my intellectualism or my rationality and become, let's say, airy-fairy. And at any rate, but this was different. This was something I qualitatively couldn't come up with a new worldview, nor could I revert to my old worldview, nor could I ignore the power of the experience. So I just accepted it phenomenologically as something that was happening to me. Now, because I am somebody who values research, I naturally did research. And I can say that the Protestant versions of Christianity, the Roman Catholic version of Christianity, didn't speak to me, and the flaws of these different approaches to Christ jumped out at me almost immediately as either superficial or too rigid or too moralistic, meaning bound up in behavior rather than relationship. And I just was like, okay, well, I guess it's just me and Jesus, or, for now. But as I continued to research, to read scripture, to engage, eventually my brother said to me, check out the Orthodox Church. At first glance, I looked at the Orthodox Church, which many people don't even know about, and thought to myself, I like how they're emphasizing the mystery and the relationship with Jesus, and I see all these structures and belief systems, and I don't know about all that. Because remember, I was not structured in any religious form, and I was wary of dogmas and rule-bound appraisals of spirituality. So anything that tried to sort of put limits on the mystery of God and put anything that seemed like a rule or a set of rules or a set of dogmas, I was wary of. But I was intrigued. So I went to the Orthodox Church. Now, the Orthodox Church, I won't do it justice, but I will try to speak to what I experienced as somebody who's new to it just since Holy Week of last year. But I walked in and immediately felt as if I was transported into ancient times. I was moved. I was absolutely moved in ways that I can't explain. The smell of the incense, the icons surrounding me, the icons are the liturgical art which represent saints and Jesus Christ himself and all of the beauties of the divine reality insofar as we can try to represent them in this earthly realm. This is a church that was devoted to a sense of beauty and a sense of worship and was centered around Christ. Now, there was the singing and the chanting and the ambience, which was filled with an aroma of love and seriousness, devotion, that this faith would demand something of me. And as I stood there, my first time at the Orthodox Church, Thursday night of Holy Week in 2025, for 3 hours, a very long service, we sung praises to God and read scripture, and I watched the liturgical service unfold, and all I can say is I was focused and I was moved, and we prostrated in front of Jesus Christ on the cross, which was standing there in front of all the people at church. And something started clicking for me. So I kept coming back, and I started researching the church, and I started making connections that wow, this tradition of Orthodox Christianity is actually sophisticated and deep in such a profound way that it can hold my previous training, my previous commitments to philosophical sophistication, but also can move me beyond them in ways that I can grow spiritually. In other words, I felt that I had found something that I would consider to be the truth. As I went over my training with Roger and the self-soul-spirit model, one of the things that we focus on is this idea of consciousness being primary. And I actually published a paper on this in the International Journal of Jungian Studies last year before I formally encountered the Orthodox Church. And my argument was basically that the universe is ordered in such a way that it makes more sense at a psychological level, at a naturalistic level, and at an ontological level, right? Every layer that we can observe all the way to the layer of base reality, it makes more sense to see consciousness as primary, meaning some sort of creative force of intelligence and intelligibility, than it does to assume that consciousness emerges out of the interactions between random particles and the convenient coalescing of certain arrangements, which allows us to have an experience and allows us to have a psyche and allows us to be alive in this way that is animated by deeper sensibility and actual phenomenality, meaning just experience, as I said. So I won't recount that whole argument here, but needless to say, it's something that I've thought a lot about, and I believe that you can make a compelling philosophical argument for, which is more convincing than materialism or physicalism, which basically says that it's a byproduct or it's an emergent process, right? Depending on how you want to look at it, depending on which branch of materialism or physicalism that you are studying. And in even many gray areas in between that wouldn't be considered exactly physicalism, but close enough. So here I am realizing what I used to think was foolishness, the idea that God could become a man. Now I realize that the foolishness was in my assumption that if there is a God, that he could somehow be limited enough not to become a man if he wanted to. In essence, it was my own closed-mindedness that I needed to confront, not the absurdity of a proposition that I thought was impossible, right? So when I opened my mind and I realized, okay, I accept the fact that there is a God, right? Because it makes more sense to say that consciousness is primary. And if consciousness is primary, well, it's not just this random consciousness without an identity. That consciousness must have a personal identity nature. Don't get into that argument now. I'm just giving you an account of where I came from and how I got here. And if that is the case, there is no reason that it wouldn't be able to manifest itself divinely as a human being, right? The logos is the Greek word that John in the Bible uses to, as well as other places in scripture and studies of the Bible, talk about the logos, that relational, animating person, which drives creation to be intelligible and is the basis of all relationship and communion and interdependence in creation, that logos took a body, and that is Christ. Now, I couldn't find anything so sophisticated in terms of that idea in any other form of Christianity other than Orthodox Christianity. And to this day, I am still captivated by it. I believe that Jesus Christ is the creator. And through my engagement with Orthodox Christianity, I found something that can hold a complex philosophical and theological account of existence while also making a tremendous amount of space for the mystery and the phenomenology of spirituality, which is to say that it doesn't confine us to ideas or make the spiritual life conceptual. It gives us practices, tools, devotions, commitments to strengthen our relationship with Christ in a way that manifests itself in a deeply personal way that can be felt as I change and become, and my desires become more about love and less about other bodily needs, urges, personal desires, and fantasies, etc. In essence, this relational logos, this person, Jesus Christ, who is God, has been transforming me into somebody who can show up for my wife and stand in the fire of uncertainty and letting go of certain things that I thought I needed or wanted, and be the person that she needs me to be, and also in that process be the person that I myself need to become in order to have a loving, transformed heart and soul. And in that process, starting to grow in humility, realizing that I myself am nothing, and that I'm just a creation of God, and my personal identity depends utterly on his existence. And his love for me is such that he wants me to be in relationship with him, and that I have a choice about being in that relationship. And that relationship is not measured by objective criteria of good behavior versus bad behavior, but is measured based on the quality of my heart posture, which, if I am in a proper orientation, will translate into loving behaviors naturally. And forgive me, because I can't really put words to this in any way that justifies it. But this is my confession. I am going to become an Orthodox Christian, God willing. I'm in the process, and I'm working with the local parish priest here in Loveland, Colorado at St. Spiridon, Father Evan. And this is something that has opened me up to deeper areas of love, and it feels wonderful. And it's funny because I'm no longer embarrassed to confess my Christianity, because it's so utterly moved me that I have no reason to defend myself or even need to explain it or justify it, other than to share it, which is different, right? It's my testimony rather than a justification or a defense. So as I go through this situation with my wife, I've been blessed and touched by God, and my heart has been transformed. But I've also been able to see now that there's so much room for my vocation and calling. And even though I've had to sacrifice certain things about my career and about my lifestyle right now, this is actually forging me through fire in such a way that is training me deeply. You know, there's no amount of academic training that could replace what I've been going through here with Victoria. And there's no amount of even supervision in psychology or work with clients that could train me in the way that I'm getting trained here at home with Victoria. And there's no amount of reading I can do and writing I can do that can train me to be as well-rounded in my approach to psychology and to spirituality as the situation is at home with Victoria. In fact, it's helping me reach a place where I'm no longer wishing that it was different. Like, I don't feel like I have to escape anymore. I feel like I'm here for a purpose, and that I'm not attached to results. I'm attached to the process of delivering the best love I can deliver. And every time I fall short of that, I get back up and I try again. And that's what I'm working on. In an all too human and imperfect way. Anyways, I'm formally pursuing Orthodox Christianity. I believe it robustly maps on to my philosophical and psychological commitments, and where I've had to make adjustments, those adjustments have felt aligned with a new direction that is true, rather than me trying to put on a suit that doesn't fit. Ram Dass had this great analogy when he went on his speaking circuits, and he would talk about belief systems or identities as suits that don't fit, outfits that are too small or too big. And that as he went through all these different phases of his identity in life, whether it was his Freudian psychology training, or whether it was his Harvard professorship, or whether it was psychedelics, that there was always a different suit that he had to put on that didn't quite fit him. And for me, my encounter with Orthodoxy feels like it's not another suit. It feels like it's saying, hey, this is a place where you can be who you are as you were designed by the Creator, and you can grow into the gifts and the struggles that you've been given for the glory of God. It also, I think the biggest testimony to Orthodox Christianity is how it trains humility. Never in my life have I encountered humility in such a deep and transcendent way as it is suffused within Orthodoxy. It is something that has just moved me to such a degree that I can't put it into words. And I've often said now that I don't believe I'm a very humble person. I don't believe that humility is something that comes naturally to me, but I will tell you this has allowed me to touch humility and allowed me to strive for humility and allowed me to not be attached to being seen a certain way or succeeding a certain way, but to truly trust God in all my ways and to realize that I'm nothing but the clay of the earth, right? And I think there's something really powerful and transformative in that acknowledgement, and which has really changed the way that I look at my life. And in fact, any struggle I have seems to be rooted in a lack of humility. I notice that when I'm upset about something or when I'm anxious about something, it's either it's a lack of trust, it's a reliance on myself rather than a reliance on God, and ultimately stems from some sort of pride or generally lack of humility, however you want to explain that. So anyways, I'm so glad that I got to share this with you, and this is my confession why I am formally pursuing Orthodox Christianity. So much more to learn, still a long way to go in terms of really understanding what it means to be an Orthodox Christian. All I can say is that right now I am really excited because there is so much room to grow that I could spend a lifetime just learning what it means to be an Orthodox Christian.